You won't believe where the U.S. just sent over 200 suspected gang members. The Biden administration has quietly deported these individuals, not back to their home country of Venezuela, but to a supermax prison in El Salvador. This controversial move has sparked legal battles, human rights concerns, and a heated debate over national security. But was this a strategic crackdown on organized crime, or a dangerous precedent that could backfire? A U.S. federal judge has ruled that similar deportations under the Alien Enemies Act, a law dating back to the 18th century, should be blocked. However, the White House says this latest removal operation had already been completed before the ruling took effect. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, speaking to CBS on Sunday, made it clear where he stands. If you're a gang member, a criminal, or a terrorist, you have no place in America, Rubio said. We're removing threats to our national security. It's that simple. But who exactly are these migrants, or, as U.S. authorities allege, gang members? According to officials, these individuals are suspected members of Tren de Aragua, a violent Venezuelan gang that originated inside a notorious prison and has since spread across Latin America and into the U.S. But there's another twist. Venezuelan migrants themselves are often the primary victims of this gang's criminal activities. The U.S. has now classified Tren de Aragua as a terrorist organization, leading to swift deportations. But the decision to send these individuals to El Salvador has raised eyebrows. President Nayib Bukele's government has been waging a brutal war on gangs, building the world's largest mega prison, known as the Terrorist Confinement Center, to house thousands of suspected criminals. The prison has been both praised for reducing crime and condemned for its extreme conditions, where inmates reportedly spend nearly 24 hours a day locked up with little to no due process. Under an agreement between the U.S. and El Salvador, the Bukele government is set to receive approximately $6 million annually to hold the deported gang members. This deal was finalized during a visit by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who met with President Bukele to discuss security cooperation. But critics argue that the rapid deportations might have bypassed legal protections, and human rights groups are sounding the alarm. So why is El Salvador willing to take in these deportees? The Bukele administration has built its reputation on eradicating gang violence, and this agreement further cements its tough-on-crime approach. While crime rates in El Salvador have dropped significantly, reports suggest that innocent people have also been caught in the mass arrests, raising concerns about due process and human rights violations. Meanwhile, Tren de Aragua remains one of the fastest-growing criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere. Originally formed inside a Venezuelan prison, the gang expanded its operations as Venezuela's economy collapsed, following migrant routes through Colombia, Chile, Peru, and eventually reaching the U.S. authorities say its members engage in extortion, drug trafficking, and violent crimes, often targeting fellow Venezuelans. The gang's expansion highlights the broader issue of transnational crime. Unlike traditional cartels, Tren de Aragua is not just focused on drug trafficking. Its members are involved in kidnapping, human smuggling, and a range of violent offenses. Its ability to infiltrate multiple countries has made it particularly difficult to combat, as law enforcement agencies must coordinate across borders to track and dismantle its operations. The Biden administration's decision to deport suspected gang members to El Salvador reflects a broader shift in immigration and national security policy. Facing growing public pressure over crime and illegal immigration, the White House has adopted more aggressive measures to remove individuals it considers threats. However, this approach raises important legal and ethical questions. If due process is not strictly followed, could innocent migrants be swept up in these mass deportations? And what guarantees are in place to ensure that those sent to El Salvador truly belong to criminal organizations? Inmates are allegedly confined for 23.5 hours a day, with minimal access to sunlight, medical care, or legal representation. This raises the question, is the U.S. outsourcing its criminal justice responsibilities? Human rights organizations have raised concerns about the treatment of deportees. Reports indicate that El Salvador's supermax prison, which now houses the suspected gang members, operates under extremely harsh conditions. To a country known for its severe crackdown on crime at the expense of human rights, there's also the diplomatic angle to consider. By sending Venezuelan gang members to El Salvador instead of back to Venezuela, the U.S. is effectively sidestepping diplomatic engagement with Nicolas Maduro's government. Relations between the U.S. and Venezuela have been tense for years, with Washington refusing to recognize Maduro as the legitimate leader of the country. Deporting suspected criminals to Venezuela could have forced diplomatic negotiations, but instead, the Biden administration has chosen to work with El Salvador, a country that has embraced U.S. cooperation on security issues. This move also sets a precedent that could influence future deportation policies. If the U.S. is willing to send suspected criminals to third-party countries, will this become a standard practice for dealing with undocumented migrants with alleged criminal ties? Could this lead to similar agreements with other nations willing to accept deportees in exchange for financial incentives? These are critical questions that could shape immigration enforcement for years to come. At the same time, some argue that the U.S. has a responsibility to prevent the spread of criminal organizations within its borders. With Tren de Aragua's influence growing in Latin America, the fear is that it could establish a stronghold in U.S. cities, much like MS-13 did in the past. The Biden administration is taking an aggressive stance now to prevent that from happening, but whether this strategy will be effective remains to be seen. As the U.S. intensifies its crackdown on gangs and illegal migration, questions remain about the effectiveness of these deportations. Are these suspected criminals truly being brought to justice, or are they simply being transferred to another country without due process? Critics argue that this policy could lead to wrongful deportations, separating families and sending individuals into a prison system that lacks transparency and oversight. Others warn that such moves could strain diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Latin American nations, particularly if more countries are asked to accept criminal deportees. The bigger issue at play is the future of U.S. immigration policy. With public concern growing over crime and border security, the Biden administration is under pressure to take decisive action. But will this approach effectively dismantle criminal networks, or will it push them further underground? And what role should Latin American countries play in handling organized crime that originates within their borders but spills into the U.S.? As this situation unfolds, it's clear that the debate over immigration and crime is far from over. What do you think? Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on the latest breaking news.